So last week we talked about the flexor tendon injuries, the mechanism by which they occur, as well as some intervention strategies using early mobilization techniques such as the Duran and the Kleiner protocol. Many of you guys liked the video and gave me really good comments. I'm glad it was easy to understand and digest. That makes me really happy. So today we're going to go over the extensor tendon injuries, and I decided to do a video on this one as well because this one is also somewhat involved and it would just be easier if I talked about it. And I say this all the time, we have to be able to talk about it and conceptualize it instead of memorizing it, right? So that's what we're going to do again today. And just to show you how much I like you guys, dun dun dun. Yes, I walked around like this today. That is my commitment to you. But here, if just a quick review on the palmar side, if you recall, if you got a deep cut here or an injury to the palmar side of your hand, you got what is a flexor tendon injury, right? And here the numbers indicate the zones. And if you remember zone 2, that was the no man's land because no man attempted to treat that area because it's hard to diagnose and treat. And it had high complication rates. So that's the no man's land. But I'm not actually going to go over this. This is quite easy to remember. I will encourage you to do that on your own. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But know that this is different than the other side, which is where the extensor tendon injuries occur. And this is where I want to place my focus today because that's the injury that I want to talk about. So let's go over these numbers real quick. 1 falls right over the DIP joint. 2 is the middle phalanx. 3 is the PIP joint. 4 is the proximal phalanx, 5 is the metacarpophalangeal joint, 6 is the metacarpophalangeal bones, and 7 is the carpal bones and the wrist. And one of the ways that I remember this one is by remembering the company called 7 Fridays. They manufacture watches. If you forget, remember where you place your watch, right over your wrist, right here. And it's by the 7 Fridays company. Okay, and 8 is the forearm. So let's talk about what happens when you get an injury to any of these zones, any of these areas there on the dorsal side of your hand, starting with the most distal area, the DIP joint. Now you could get an injury to the DIP joint here in zone 1 through a cut, laceration, or it could be a jamming. So anytime you're playing sports or in your occupation when you're just like tucking your bed sheet under your bed. I mean, simple activities is delicate, so it's easy to injure, but any traumatic avulsion or laceration could injure the DIP joint and tear that tendon away from the bone, giving you what looks like the mallet finger, which is the flexion of the DIP joint, inability to extend that joint. Now that is a poor demonstration. My husband can do this perfectly because he's hyper jointed, but imagine and visualize flexion of that DIP joint as a result of a laceration or a traumatic avulsion where the tendon will tear from the bone and then you get a flexion of the DIP joint. So what do? We would need to bring that back up and keep it extended with a DIP extension splint continuously for up to 6 weeks here. Okay, so that's the intervention splinting, DIP extension splint for a mallet finger. Did I mention that it was the mallet finger? DIP flexion, inability to extend that DIP joint is the mallet finger. And I mentioned that it could occur as a result of laceration and avulsion traumatic impact. It's more likely that it'll happen due to a traumatic impact avulsion rather than a laceration in this area because of the many ways that we use our hand. Like think about a basketball player putting that ball over the hoop, or the many things that we do using our hands that could actually cause that impact and tear that tendon right there. okay, resulting in the mallet finger. I actually know a few people in my life with a mallet finger, and it's painless. It doesn't cause them any pain, but because they didn't do that extension splint in the middle, which is critical early rehab, it stayed that way with the DIP flexion. So DIP splinting is important. Now, we're moving from zone 1 to zone 3 to 4, which is at the PIP joint and the proximal phalanx. And can you guys guess what deformity that might be? It's the boutonniere. So when you have a laceration here or a traumatic avulsion like the DIP joint, or in this case, a rheumatoid arthritis. So this is the capsular distension that could occur with the rheumatoid arthritis could give you that boutonniere deformity, which is the flexion of the PIP joint and hyperextension of the DIP joint. It looks kind of like that. Ooh, I'm doing this one better, okay? So when you have a boutonniere deformity, which will result in inability to extend your PIP joint, you will want to get an extension splint, a PIP extension splint right over that PIP joint and keep it in that splint continuously for up to 6 weeks, like the mallet finger, like the DIP joint. Now, one thing to note for this splinting is that it goes over only the PIP joint right here, and you keep that DIP joint free to do active range of motion. Okay, so PIP extension splint right there. Did I just give you guys the middle finger? Didn't mean to. Okay, now moving further along to 5, 6, 7. What happens when you have an injury there? You will get a volar wrist splint to position your wrist in about 20 to 30 degree extension. Your MCPs in 0 to 10 maybe flexion, and you'll keep it in that volar wrist splint for a couple of weeks, and then you may after a couple of weeks decide to shorten the splint, give a shorter splint so that the IPs can move around. And at around 4 to 5 weeks, you'll move splint here and there so that you could actively flex and extend your MCP. And remember, mobilization in tendon injury is important to keep scar adhesion from forming, as well as to encourage excursion. And we learned that in the other video as well, right? And around 6 weeks, you will discharge the splint. I think that's it. So this was not as involved as the flexor tendon injuries, but I did want to go over the zones real quick with you guys and remind you, if you haven't learned these zones for both the extensor side and the flexor side, please take some time to do so. And if I can have fun and doodle all over, and I'm not even taking the board, then you have no excuse. I want to encourage you guys to do this to get a visual memory. It's much better than just staring at the paper. So join me and the fun. All right, so that concludes our review of tendon injuries, and I will continue on with splints this week and throughout next. Okay? All right, have a great rest of your week, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.